They said she only had hours left. Not days, not weeks, just hours. The machines were quiet. The air in the ICU was thick with that strange blend of bleach, beeping monitors, and breath that always felt borrowed. Sarah had been strong her whole life. Independent, fierce in the best way. She raised 3 kids, worked 2 jobs, beat cancer once. But this time was different. This time her body wasn't bouncing back. Her lungs had given out. Her blood pressure was unstable. The doctors had done everything, and they were kind, but honest. She's fading, they said. It's only a matter of time. Her family was gathered, whispering outside her room. One daughter holding a Bible, the other holding back tears. Her son just stood in the corner, fists clenched, jaw tight, as if willing her back with nothing but silence. And Sarah? She was unconscious, pale, still, drifting between here and whatever comes next. But somewhere in a different part of town, a woman she had never met was about to change everything. And all it took was a single prayer. Let's go back for a moment. Just 3 days before this, Sarah was still at home then. Tired, yes. Struggling to breathe, yes. But she was still sitting in her favorite chair by the window, sipping tea through a straw, wrapped in a thin blanket, her Bible resting on her knees. She wasn't afraid of death. She had made peace with the idea years ago, or at least she thought she had. But what terrified her now was how fast everything was unraveling. The strength she once relied on was leaving her body in pieces. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her hands trembled. Her voice was quieter with each sunrise. And her prayers? They felt empty. She whispered them still. But she wondered if heaven had stopped listening. That afternoon, as she looked outside, something stirred in her. She whispered, God, if this is it, then be near. But if there's more you want me to do, don't let me go yet. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted. It was just real. A fragile woman whispering from a place of half surrender, half hope. And somewhere in the quiet, it echoed louder than she knew. 2 days later, the ambulance came. She collapsed in the hallway. Her daughter found her, barely breathing, face gray. The paramedics worked fast. Oxygen, IV, questions no one could answer fast enough. And as they lifted her into the back of the van, the neighbor across the street, a woman named Lillian, stepped outside to watch. She didn't know Sarah well. Just a few waves from the mailbox, some passing hellos. But something about the scene, the flashing lights, the urgency, the pale face in the stretcher, it struck her deep. And without even thinking, she whispered aloud, God be with her. Simple, soft, no fanfare, just one sentence lifted from the heart of a stranger. Here's what no one knew. That prayer, that moment, set something in motion. Because God doesn't need long prayers. He doesn't require the perfect setting. He just needs the willing whisper of someone who cares, even if they don't understand why. That night, as Sarah lay unconscious in the ICU, something strange happened. The monitors didn't improve. Her condition didn't suddenly turn around. But the nurse, someone who wasn't even scheduled to work that night, walked in, paused at the foot of Sarah's bed, and said to no one in particular, she reminds me of my mother. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she pulled a chair to Sarah's side, took her hand, and began to pray. She didn't know Sarah's story, didn't know if she was a believer, didn't know if it was welcome, but she felt a nudge, the kind that doesn't come from within, but from above. And as she whispered, God, don't let her go yet, if there's more for her to do. She had no idea she was echoing the exact words Sarah had spoken from that chair by the window just days before. Heaven was connecting dots only God could see. By morning, something had changed. Sarah was still critical, but the doctors noticed something strange. Her oxygen levels had stabilized. Her pulse was stronger. The swelling in her lungs had lessened. It wasn't a full recovery. Not yet. But it was enough for the doctor to pause and say, well, that wasn't expected. They used words like response to treatment and turning a corner. But the daughter holding that worn-out Bible, she called it something else. She looked at her unconscious mother and whispered, "Someone's been praying." And she was right. Lillian wasn't someone you would expect to be part of a miracle. She didn't preach. She wasn't on any church committee. She didn't even call herself religious. Not in the traditional sense. But she believed in God. And she prayed, quietly, often without words, usually while watering her plants or folding laundry. She didn't speak in tongues. She didn't prophesy. She didn't claim to hear voices. But that day, when she saw the ambulance lights flashing across the front of Sarah's house, when she caught that split-second glimpse of her neighbor's pale face being wheeled away, she felt something deep, a pull, a jolt, a holy ache, and out of instinct more than intention, she whispered, "God be with her." She didn't know it was a prayer. She didn't think it counted. She certainly didn't imagine it mattered. But in the kingdom of God, where mustard seeds grow into trees and whispers shake heaven, it mattered more than she could imagine. That night, Lillian couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Sarah, the image of her frail body, the way her daughter's hands trembled as she locked the front door. Lillian didn't know much, but she knew what it felt like to be afraid. She'd buried her husband 6 years earlier, lost a pregnancy before that, spent too many nights holding her breath, wondering if God still cared. And somehow, in Sarah's collapse, she saw echoes of her own. So she got up, pushed aside the covers, paced the floor, sat by the window with a cup of tea growing cold in her hand, and she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She prayed out loud. Nothing fancy, just honest. "God, I don't know her story, but you do. And if you can hear me, be near. Send someone. Breathe into her. Give her one more day if it's in your will. And if not, let her feel you holding her." She paused, felt silly, wondered if she was talking to herself. But she stayed in that chair until the sky started turning purple. Meanwhile, in that sterile hospital room, Sarah's numbers began to shift. Small, slow, but just enough for the attending physician to frown and say, "Let's wait before we make the call." They had planned to move her to palliative care. Her chart said non-responsive. The nurse on shift, the one who'd prayed by her bedside, had been told to begin prepping the family. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed. She prayed. She whispered over and over, "God, speak where machines cannot. Do what only you can do." And then Sarah opened her eyes, not wide, not strong, but enough. Enough for her daughter to gasp. Enough for the nurse to rush out and grab the nearest doctor. Enough to change everything. She couldn't speak, but her eyes locked onto her son, and then they filled with tears, because she was still here. Somehow. Still here. Back across town, Lillian was still sitting by the window. She hadn't moved in hours. The street was quiet again. The world had gone back to sleep, but she felt something in her chest. A warmth. A quiet assurance. She didn't know why, but she whispered one last thing before finally climbing back into bed. "Thank you." She didn't know what for, but heaven did. The next morning, Lillian got dressed and did something completely out of character. She baked a small loaf of banana bread, walked across the street to Sarah's house, and knocked on the door. One of Sarah's daughters answered, eyes swollen, face tired. And when Lillian offered the bread and asked softly, "How is she?" she wasn't prepared for the answer. She opened her eyes last night. They said she wasn't supposed to, but she did, and we don't know why. Lillian didn't say anything. She just nodded, held back tears, and said quietly, "Then maybe God still has something for her to do." The daughter blinked. "I was praying," she said. Lillian smiled. "Me too." And for the first time, maybe ever, two women, different in age, background, and belief, stood on a front porch, holding banana bread and broken hearts, and realized prayer had connected them before words ever did. Sarah didn't wake up all at once. It was like surfacing from the deepest part of the ocean, slow, disorienting, silent. First came sound, a hum, a faint beep, a voice that didn't belong to her. Then came light, not the warm kind that shines through windows, but the cold, sterile glow of hospital fluorescence. And finally pain. Not sharp, just heavy. A full-body exhaustion that said, "You were somewhere else, and now you're back." She blinked slowly. Shapes came into view. Her son, her daughter, a nurse leaning close. But it wasn't their faces that brought tears to her eyes. It was the peace, the strange, soft peace that covered her like a blanket, as if someone had stood beside her while she was slipping away and gently said, "Not yet." Later, much later, when she had the strength to speak again, her daughter asked her what she remembered, and Sarah said something no one expected. She said, "I heard something, not a voice, not words, but something warm, something that said, 'You're not alone. Someone's praying.'" Her daughter's eyes widened. "We were. All of us. The nurse, too." Sarah shook her head slowly. "It wasn't just you. It was someone else. Someone I didn't know." That part stayed with her, even when her body was weak, even when the test results still looked uncertain, even when the doctors offered cautious optimism. That presence, the feeling that even in her unconsciousness, someone was interceding on her behalf, had changed something in her spirit. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, personal, real. She later described it like this: "It felt like God used someone's breath to breathe me back into being." Back at home weeks later, Sarah recovered slowly. Breathing treatments, physical therapy, check-ins, and cautious walks from bedroom to kitchen. But her soul was no longer afraid. Not of death, not of silence, and not of prayer. Because now she knew. Prayer wasn't just something she sent up. It was something that had found her. She asked her daughter to take her outside one morning, just to sit in her chair by the window again. The air was cool, the trees were quiet, and across the street, she saw a familiar figure tending to a flower bed. It was Lillian. Their eyes met. Sarah lifted one trembling hand and waved. Lillian waved back. Neither said a word, but they both smiled. The kind of smile that said, "I know." Because some connections don't need conversation. They're made in the spirit, where God whispers across miles and circumstances. Pray for her. She needs you. Speak peace into her night. Sarah never asked Lillian what she prayed, and Lillian never asked Sarah what she heard. But they both knew the truth. God used one quiet woman's whisper to wake another woman from the edge of death. And somehow that made perfect sense. It would have been easy for Kirs to return to normal life, to chalk it all up to medicine, timing, or luck. That's what a few friends did. They smiled politely. They said things like, "Glad the doctors got it under control," or "You're lucky they caught it in time." Sarah didn't argue, but in her heart she knew better. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It wasn't coincidence. It was intercession, unseen, unexplained, undeniable. Someone, maybe several someones, had stood in the gap when she couldn't stand for herself, and that changed the way she saw everything. Her morning started differently now. Before the tea, before the pills, she sat in that same window chair and whispered, "Who needs prayer today, Lord? Even if I don't know them, show me." Sometimes it was a name, sometimes just a feeling. Other times no answer came, but she prayed anyway, because now she understood. Prayer doesn't need details to be powerful. It just needs obedience. Across the street, Lillian felt something shift too. She hadn't told many people what happened, but something about that night, that restless pull to pray for a neighbor she barely knew, it stayed with her. She began walking more, not to exercise, but to pay attention, to faces, to porches, to people. She found herself praying for strangers at red lights, for cashiers in the grocery store, for kids skateboarding past her house. Small whispered things. God, be near. God, show them they're seen. God, interrupt their fear with peace. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. One Sunday, Sarah and her daughter made it back to church. She hadn't been in over a year. Her steps were slow, but her spirit was strong. And during the service, when the pastor asked, "Has anyone seen God move lately?" Sarah stood, unsteady but certain, and she shared the story of the ICU, of the prayer, of waking to peace she hadn't earned. She didn't name names, didn't mention Lillian, but Lillian was watching online from home that day. And as Sarah finished her story, Lillian sat back in her chair, eyes full, heart pounding, because she knew. She had been part of it, and not because she was qualified, not because she had eloquent words, but because she had responded. That was all God needed. After service, a woman from the back of the church approached Sarah. She was quiet, young, nervous. She said, "My mom's in the hospital right now. I haven't prayed in years, but when you spoke, something broke open in me. Would you pray for her?" Sarah reached for her hand without hesitation. Her fingers still shook, but her voice didn't. "Of course," she said. "I'll pray, like someone prayed for me." And that moment, simple, unscripted, sacred, was the beginning of something more. Because that's what happens when God breathes on a story. It doesn't end where the healing begins. It ripples from stranger to soul, from one prayer to another life, from the ICU to a woman on the back row of a quiet church service. That's the power of prayer. Not just that it reaches God, but that it reaches us, changes us, connects us, invites us to be part of something we may never fully see but always feel. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't end in fireworks. They end in stillness, in peace, in something changing, not outside of us, but inside. Sarah lived, yes, but more than that, Sarah believed again. She believed that God still hears, still moves, still connects people in ways we can't explain and don't have to. She believed that prayer, even from a stranger, has the power to break through death itself. And Lillian, she believed too, that her whisper wasn't wasted, that obedience didn't need an audience. That sometimes when you feel the nudge to pray, you might be partnering with God in a miracle. Maybe you've been listening to this story wondering if your quiet prayers mean anything. If God sees the ones you've whispered in your car, in the laundry room, on the edge of your bed, in the hospital hallway. The answer is yes. Yes, He sees. Yes, He hears. Yes, He still responds. And maybe, just maybe, the reason you're still watching right now is because someone once prayed for you. Someone you may never meet. Someone who felt a nudge. Someone who lifted your name, or maybe just your face, to God in a moment they didn't fully understand. And God remembered. That's how He works. Quietly, faithfully, through people who are willing to pray and let Him do the rest. So if tonight you're carrying a burden for someone, or if you're the one in the hospital bed, or if you feel like your prayers bounce off the ceiling, don't stop. Don't stop praying. Don't stop believing. Don't stop lifting names. Even if they're strangers, even if you never know how it turns out, because someone's miracle may begin with your whisper, just like Sarah's did, and someone else's faith may come alive because you dared to trust, even when no one else was watching. Let's pray together. Father, thank You for the people who prayed for us when we didn't know we needed it. Thank You for the strangers who listened to Your voice. Thank You for showing us that prayer doesn't have to be big to be powerful. God, stir something in us now. Remind us that our words, even the quiet ones, carry weight in heaven. Help us pray for those we love and for those we've never met. Help us trust that You are always working through moments we can't see and people we don't expect. Let us be the kind of people who pray first, love deep, and believe again. In Jesus' name, amen. If this story moves something in your heart, if it reminded you that God still uses the quiet ones, the unseen ones, the obedient ones, then don't walk away from that feeling. Subscribe to this channel, not just for more stories, but to be part of something real. A community of people who believe that faith still matters, that prayer still works, that God is still writing stories like this one every single day. Here, you're not just a viewer. You're part of a faith family, one that lifts each other up, one that stands in the gap, one that prays even for strangers. So stay, share your story, and keep believing, because the next miracle might begin with you.